Welcome to Independently Speaking, the podcast from the Independent Schools Association. ISA represents head teachers leading independent schools across the UK, each one unique. From small community schools to specialist institutions focused on performing arts, outdoor education, faith, sport, or special educational needs. ISA members reflect the remarkable diversity of independent education. Join us as we hear from school leaders navigating the challenges and opportunities shaping their schools and the wider sector. And now, here is your host, ISA Director of Education and Inclusion, Helen Stanton-Tonner.
Welcome to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. I am your host, Helen Stanton-Tonner, the Director of Education and Inclusion for ISA. In today's episode, we're turning our attention to one of the most urgent and fast-moving questions facing education leaders. How do we thrive as humans in the age of artificial intelligence? AI is no longer an abstract future concern for schools. It's here. It's evolving rapidly, and it's reshaping how leaders think about learning, about teaching, about their workload and assessment and professional identity. But today's teachers have got to think alongside the technological question. They've got to think about the deeply human ones too. Culture, trust, agency, thinking, and even purpose. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Ben Whitaker today. Ben is an education consultant, speaker, and podcast host, best known through the Edufuturists platform and his work as the Ideas Guy. Now, he advises schools, trusts, and education organisations on AI strategy, innovational culture, and the future of learning, with a really sharp focus on helping leaders move beyond that surface-level adoption to really purposeful, values-led use of technology. Ben's work centres on what he calls agency with guardrails. The belief that autonomy and structure are not opposites, but essential partners. Through his writing, his speaking, coaching, and consultancy, Ben challenges leaders to create the conditions where people can think deeply, work creatively, and remain human, even as AI becomes more powerful. Ben, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
Now, Ben, you spend a great deal of time working with leaders who feel both excited but also overwhelmed by AI. From your perspective, what's the biggest misunderstanding school leaders have about what AI actually demands of them?
I think it's two big things, and I know that biggest is a singular term, but I'm going to come up with two if that's okay. I think most people think, and they are connected, most people think that AI is a technology problem that needs to be solved technologically. So it's like, what's the right tool to use, how to prompt the machine, how to get the best out of what we've got, how do we protect, it's a data conversation, all those things are valid. But I actually, and I've just talked about this, think that this is very much a culture problem. And although lots of people in this space talk about, it's about culture, many people think that you can write a policy out of, and that will get you out of dealing with the technology that is in front of us, where realistically that's a cultural values, leadership, what matters to us, our behaviours and our norms, what we accept. So I think the biggest misunderstanding then becomes making this a technological problem instead of a cultural problem. And tied to that then, and I mention this quite a lot, and IT people often get upset with me, but I mean it in the nicest possible way, is that if we defer all our decisions around AI to technologists, and we don't have any conversation about pedagogy, about pastoral, about human development, which isn't just technical, it falls short. And I think that the big misunderstanding is that this is just like interactive whiteboards or iPads or the latest software. It's very, very different.
And you also talk, don't you, about moving beyond that sort of surface level adoption of technology. So what does sort of the purposeful, values-led AI use look like in a school, that, from your perspective? And how does that start with leadership rather than tools?
It's a great question. And I think moving it into that values-led, into that well-led, and I think the word led makes a difference there, that's about leadership, is moving away from it being what can this tool do and which tool should I use, to what are we trying to achieve. And the question I asked in the presentation to leaders at the conference was, how do humans thrive in the age of AI? And the conversation started by asking, do we know what it means to thrive? So if we haven't got a conversation about what we're trying to achieve, then you can be sold a tech product, you can be sold an AI product, and it's then becomes wallpaper, and it becomes not having any impact because we haven't asked the question of what is the problem we're trying to solve. I say quite regularly, and again, some of the tech companies don't always love this, but I say quite regularly that I see so much technology that's a solution looking for a problem, and AI is definitely becoming that, and every person seems to be creating a new AI product. But if we don't know what we're trying to achieve, then we're going to get fall into a non-values led leadership around AI and culture.
That is so true. I completely agree with that. And you also use a term sort of like agency with guardrails. Now, this sort of echoes really strongly with leadership in schools, but it's terminology that fits well within education. So how can leaders give staff and pupils that meaningful autonomy with AI, which they need in order to progress, while still providing the clarity, ethics, and structure of the guardrails?
Yeah, it's a great question. That phrase agency with guardrails came out of parenting, actually, about my own parenting and my own teenagers. And it was about, how do I help them to make wise decisions without going through the hard things to get to that, or mistakes, or as many mistakes. So the conversation was about screen time, actually. And my daughters determine how long they spend on a screen. And therefore, when they want to have more time on the screen than what their screen time allows, they have to ask a question. Dad, can I have more screen time? Rather than it being continuous screen time and I've done 5 hours on it, they could still do 5 hours, but that's a conscious decision. There's a little bit of friction between them having to ask. So then they've got to make a decision. So the guardrails are there. I still have screen time, but the conversation there is around they're making their own decisions. And I don't always agree. And sometimes I don't want to say yes, but I almost always say yes. Why? Because they're making that decision. And if they can't get up in the morning, they can't function properly, and they don't do as well, I'll help them out of that. But realistically, then they get the consequences. So I think tying that back into what that means from a school's perspective, and how do leaders do that for educators and young people in that space, I think it's about that managed risk taking. It's what we do in education, full stop. We don't just say, right, we're going to let every child go kayaking. You go, well, there's a conversation about, can they swim? Have we got suitably trained people? Is the conditions acceptable? So you create spaces and say, it's not do what you want, because that's agency without guardrails. And it's not saying, no, you can't go kayaking. We just make decisions about what that looks like. And so that means manage risk taking. So is it pilots? Is it working with small groups, small departments to trial something and then look at what the impact of that is? Is it more around the training that sits in that space and bringing in the right people in the space to help develop that? I was saying before we went onto the podcast that a lot of the work that I do at the moment is around coaching of those people who are trying to lead in this space. And what it turns out to be is, it's not that they need another expert in the room, because the person who's a teaching and learning expert in the room, or the person that's a behaviour expert or pastoral expert in your organisation, possibly needs to be having a conversation about AI with somebody who lives and breathes in the AI world, rather than it must be a tech person on my own. I think it's a wrong mentality often. And so the ability for them to have a sounding board or know where to go and build that collaborative with other people that are in the space, I think is possibly how you can create that space.
And that kind of leads in sort of like with leaders. Obviously, if they haven't got the experience in that space, they're going to worry about staff workload. They're going to worry about relevance and possibly also identity in an AI-rich environment. So how can those leaders support their teams? Obviously, you're talking about supporting them. So how can they support their teams with emotionally and professionally through it's such a rapid period of change?
I think the support in that space is, and it is a very different change than anything else we've dealt with, but independent schools, and not even just independent schools, have been developed resilience. More recently, there's lots of resilience that are having to develop around some of the changes that have been imposed on somebody. AI is one of those things that's been imposed in society. It's not something you can choose into that space. But a good, emotionally supportive leader will help people feel seen, safe, and heard in that space. So it's where there is resistance, where there is a level of reticence to embrace in that space, is it's not dismissing it and saying top-down approach. It's an understanding. And I think that good leaders do that anyway. They lead and bring people with them. The other thing is trying to address what is the underlying issue that sits there. Is it that they feel like AI is just another phase? It's just another piece of technology that's going to go away, like we've mentioned, or is it that their worry is it's fundamentally changing what it means to teach, and therefore they feel, is it a fear? Is it a lack of training? Is it there isn't enough resource in that space? So an emotionally savvy leader in that space will ask the questions about what the resistance is, what is causing the resistance, and then look to help people feel seen, safe, and heard in that space. And I think tied to that then is not being swayed by all the winds of change. And good leadership is tied to the idea that we don't just change at every whim. Oh, that looks nice. That school down the road is using that. That school, who is outstanding, or whatever word we use to describe it now, did this, and therefore we must do that. It's what makes our school the school that it is, and how do we use AI to then enhance that, as opposed to I must do this because everybody else is.
And you're also talking there about avoiding the shiny penny, aren't you? That looks really attractive, and actually engaging in that deep thinking.
For sure.
So how can school leaders prioritize that deep thinking over efficiency? Because sometimes, technology, AI, all these things, people think about how can this make our work quicker, better, faster. So how do we persuade leaders that actually they need to do the deep thinking before the efficiency?
So this probably ties into the fact that I used to be a religious studies philosophy teacher. So deep thinking is, I smile, even though that people who listen to this can't see me smiling. It's because I'm having a broader conversation now about critical thinking and values and judgment and all those conversations. And so therefore, what do we need to do to develop that deep thinking is we need to generate space. That's full stop. That is the answer. We have so much stuff in school, in education, curriculum, so much of everything's a priority. I went to a school the other day and they had 17 strategic priorities. Well, they're not priorities. By definition, it can't be a priority. So therefore, the conversation around thinking is being able to give people time and space to think. That means that they're going to get things wrong, and that willingness to embrace failure. Stephen Bartlett employs ahead of failure at his organisation. Like their role is to fail as fast as possible so that we can learn from that. And what do we pick from that? Failure isn't final or fatal unless it's final. And that conversation of it's learning if we learn from it, and therefore it's learning if we learn from it. That's the key, right? So therefore, how do you create space for the people to learn when things are difficult or when they don't get things right? And so, yeah, I think creating space for deep thinking and then permission to fail.
And that permission to fail is something we are trying to develop with the students all the time, isn't it? And it's strange how sometimes when we look at our own priorities within education, we don't always give ourselves the same amount of space and same amount of opportunity and permission to do so. And that kind of leads into sort of how leadership and leaders are thinking about their own role in the age of AI and all the fast development. So what do you think remains distinctly human about leadership that AI cannot replace?
I think this is really hard because most people then go, well, AI can't look you in the eyes and be able to tell whether you are suffering or whether you're in pain and develop that level of empathy and compassion. And I do think that those things are distinctly human, but increasingly the technology is being able to read signals and body language and tone of voice and skill set. In fact, we were having a conversation earlier about how far away is the technology that will literally sit in a classroom, listen to everything that's going on, watch what is being put onto student books or whatever else, or assignments, and then be able to make decisions about the progress. And so they don't need to sit a 3-hour A-level exam or whatever else. That is definitely possible now. I'm sure the technology exists. It's just whether we want it to exist. And so what stays uniquely human is very difficult for it to divine, because once on a day we would have said, well, communication, like we communicate, we non-verbally communicate. Well, listen to some of the quality of the AI generated voices that exist now and the nuance that sits in there. It's very difficult to tell the difference. And I would also say in that space, then an AI system might be able to like create surface patterns and all the other things that I think deep down, the thing that makes leaders is their ability to build relationship over time. And can AI do that? Possibly. Context and experience. Can AI have that unless you've given it that? And the bit that really sits for me is AI can give you answers, but can it make judgments? And judgment as a piece is the ability to weigh up multiple different elements to be able to then make it doesn't often it's AI sycophantic, isn't it? It tells you exactly what you want to hear. It doesn't make a judgment. And therefore I wonder whether that is what makes us uniquely human, but I don't think for long. Possibly, maybe, I don't know.
It's because everything's changing so fast, isn't it? And you're right that the capabilities of AI are moving on almost a daily basis.
Yep.
Now, you work with schools sort of on strategy as well as sort of as culture, and you're sort of working alongside the leaders in schools. So how can they align AI use with their school's purpose and values, rather than allowing the tools to drive their decisions? So, taking the lead with that.
It's not getting drowning in the what. It would be my thing. And it is very cheesy, and everybody says about start with why and making sure the why. I think we do need to make sure that we do that. But if a school has a genuine commitment to pupil voice, for example, or inclusive practice, or holistic thriving, whatever it looks like, or even outdoor learning, then AI adoption should be tested against those. And so therefore, if you want to use AI, does that then fit what we want it to do? So does this tool serve those commitments, or is it like undermining that deeply? I think the other bit that sits in there is that if you don't explicitly tell the AI tools what you're expecting of them, it's going to make assumptions by nature of the way that it works. And therefore, if you don't have a clear sense of what you're looking to achieve, and then tell it that. And I think long term, these large language models and the broader AI tools that sit out there are learning, and I use that term loosely because that's a very human space. As a philosopher, like the word thinking, if you think Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. If we're saying that machines are thinking, are you making it human? Anyway, that's a philosopher in me. The principle really, I think, is that if we are suggesting that if we don't have a clear sense of that and we don't tell it that, then it's gonna assume, and therefore you're gonna get things that aren't aligned to what your purpose is and what you're looking for. So, and I don't think that's malicious in that sense, and I don't think that the logic is filling it. The logic's got to fill that gap. So the AI logic's got to fill that gap. So it's just what happens when you don't bring your own values to that table first, or else because it will assume them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for any leaders who might be listening, as they're sort of thinking about adopting or taking first steps into this sort of AI world, what would you recommend for them so they can build confident, thoughtful AI cultures without rushing into it or fearing too much or freezing and not doing anything?
I would suggest the start point is a conversation, not a policy. And I know that might be difficult because we are ruled by policies in education, but the reality is the policy is out of date as soon as you've written it, and you can't use a 12-month cycle. I'm a governor, chair of governors in organisations, and I know that we have a policy review every 12 months at governors. Policy will not cut it. The conversation is the first place to start. senior team in a room having a conversation. What do we believe about learning? What we're worried about losing? What would be proud to say we did here in 5 years? The things that we talk existentially, and then say, where does AI then sit into that? So, because you can build something coherent from the what we want to achieve and what matters, like we've talked about already. So thinking about 2 or 3 then teachers or support staff or people that are potentially passionate in that space, then give them some freedom and to play. Get them some support where it's required, get them in networks or with coaching or whatever else it looks like to support that. And then let them have some of those pilot projects is what I would say, and then report back on the impact, what they think it might look like. So rather than an IT manager or you as a leader in that space, let the people that are doing this on the ground have a play, give them some freedom, some budget or whatever else that looks like before you mandate anything or determine that that is what we are going to use. Tied to that, I think from a leadership perspective, I would strongly suggest that we don't think, well, I've gone so far down a line in this ecosystem that I can't be willing to change. So if the right tool happens to be X program that your organization look, well, that doesn't work with what we've got. Well, how do we make it work would be my question. How do we find a way? Because that's the right thing for us and the purpose we've got, rather than says computer says no, which happens a lot. And I would very much recommend that. And I suppose the last bit is don't rush straight into writing a policy and a strategy. Think about the culture first. So that's the conversational culture, the risk culture, the failure, learning, the opportunity, the support, the coaching, have those pieces rather than running into writing an AI strategy and getting somebody into to write all that for you. That's not me getting myself out of work, by the way. I think there is times that some of you will already be at that space to be able to do that. What I'm saying is that's not the start point.
And that links very well, isn't it, to a lot of the times when you speak about not leaving AI in the hands of the IT guy in the setting. It's very much a top-down approach and a philosophy approach. Yeah. Finally, sort of, if we try and look ahead, sort of we'll go a few years, not too many years into the future, because I know how rapidly everything is changing. What do you hope most that school leaders might protect, but also what they might actively nurture as AI becomes more embedded in education?
Easy answer. The easiest answer of all the questions, thinking. We don't need to tell young people or teachers what to think. We need to give them opportunity to develop their own thinking. And so the space for thinking, to make judgments, to think about values, I really hope that thinking comes back to the front of the table. So that idea around critical thinking, and that's not just looking at things from a variety of viewpoints, although that happens. It's the ability to think about bias, think about values, think about judgment, think about logic. It's a philosophy in that space. Logic has to be central. Like, does this make sense? Is this valid? How do we know? How do I know that something's true? How do I know something's accurate? Well, I look at other sources and therefore I validate that. So thinking and judgment needs to be part of that. And I would hope that leaders will not just defer thinking, because let the AI do the doing and the grunt work, and let the humans do the thinking.
Ben, thank you so much for such a thoughtful and grounding conversation. You've really reminded us that thriving in the age of AI is not about chasing every new tool, but about clarity of purpose, having a strong culture, and leaders who create the conditions for people to think, to question, and to grow. Your emphasis on agency and humanity and leadership responsibility really feels especially important at a time when the pace of change can feel so relentless. Thank you also for your insight and your challenge, and for helping us reframe AI not as something that diminishes human work, but something that really demands better leadership from us all. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe and share it with colleagues. Join us next time as we continue exploring how independent school leaders can navigate complexity with confidence, integrity, and care. Until then, stay curious, stay connected.
You've been listening to Independently Speaking, the podcast of the Independent Schools Association. For more information about ISA and the schools we support, please visit isaschools.org.uk.